Dumka in Jharkhand. Huh? Is okay? Are you rolling? Okay. So welcome to you all on behalf of the India International Center, the Maharashtra Sanskritik Ani Ranniti Adhyan Samiti, and the Working Group on Alternative Strategies. This discussion on May 1st, we started way back in 2010. And if Alone can remember, he was there then an assistant professor. Now he's become 15 years ago. He was very much there, and we had the honor of having Gail Omvetit with us that day. And we discussed Ghulamgiri to Asmita, Jyotiba Phule, and social reform movement. So we've been doing this right through then. And then we had Justice V.S. Sirpurkar, who was then the judge of the Supreme Court, who's been going on right since then. And then, so we had just a short, in 2016, we had Dalit Vision. Then in 2017, we discussed the political economy of the Dalit struggle. 2018, Dalit anger, ground realities from Bhima Koregaon to court ruling. Then 2019, annihilating casteism in the Indian Republic. 2020, we could not hold it due to COVID. And then in 21, we had a webinar because the COVID was still on. So it was Who is Afraid of Caste? And then in 2022, we had Indian Republic, Democracy, Equity, and Count West. So we are happy that the government has now agreed to do a caste count. That was yesterday, huh? Yeah. And then in 23, we had aspirations and assertions from the margins and social inequality in India. This year, we are going to discuss the, 24, we had the struggle of Dalits and Adivasis, hegemony of social elites, and Babasaheb Ambedkar's legacy. Okay. Now, so this year we are going to take up Constitution of India, a bulwark against casteist hegemony. Now we have a distinguished panel of speakers as usual. We have Professor G. Mohan Gopal, who's come in from Trivandrum. Very, very nice of you, sir. And former Vice-Chancellor of the National Law School of India, Bangalore. Then we have Professor Sumeet Mhaskar, Professor of Labor Sociology at the Jindal School, who is actually was to have joined us from Amsterdam right now, but there's been a slip up. He's already on the flight, but he has made a recording. So we'll be sharing his recording. Somehow we could manage to get the recording done. Then we have, of course, Professor Vidhu Verma, Professor of the Center for Political Studies, JNU. Subhash, Ghatade, independent researcher, writer, translator, and activist. Professor Alone, Professor of Individual Studies, School of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And we have now also got Dr. Achyut Chetan joining us from Sido, Kanhu, Murmu University, Dumka. Yes. Now, the interesting thing about Chetan, you know, this is the first time he's on this program, is that, doing a PhD from Colombia, and then working with the tribals in Dumka. You know, there's something. You know, we honor you for that, Chetan. I hope you take it in the right spirit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and yours truly, Suhas Borker will be moderating this discussion. Okay, now There's a little, we always honor the speakers. I mean, we can't do it virtually, but the speakers here, we give them Angavastram. Now, this Angavastram is, made in Salem, Tamil Nadu, and it's called Ganga Jamuna, and this is reflects our pluralistic traditions. Down in Tamil Nadu, they call it Jamuna, Ganga Jamuna. So it's something. So we'll honor you, the four here present, and then we light the lamp, and then we'll proceed with the. Okay. So I have the honor. Quite a collection. Yeah. So can we just light the lamp now, Babasaheb? Yeah. Come. I'm sorry. The question is sometimes put that why do we remember Babasaheb today, not on the 14th of April? He had massive contribution to the labor movement also, which few of us remember. I mean, especially for women's participation, and then maternity leave that was instituted by him, and then the work hours were limited. That was done. I mean, he had, and then because it's 14th April, everybody does it on that day. So we linked it up with the May Day, and then, of course, the Maharashtra Day also. It all started with that. Yeah. So interestingly, Professor Mohan Gopal will take up the issue of caste and its current of modern caste. And he then questions, is there a caste hegemony in India today? What is the bulwark against caste hegemony built into the constitution by Babasaheb, including 20 weapons of caste destruction? What is the counter-revolution against the annihilation of caste, which has breached this bulwark? So without further ado, I request. Go there. Yeah, wherever, whichever, you can go there also. Fine. Yeah, more convenient.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Borker, and good evening to everyone. It's a great honor to be here. Several old friends, and very nice to see them, and to have the honor to discuss these issues with them. We begin, of course, again reiterating our enormous debt of gratitude to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who has brought us together today and continues to bring people together across the country and across the world, many years after many others have been forgotten. It's because of the power of his ideas. And so remembering him, we plow into this question, very daunting question on the Constitution as a bulwark against caste. And I'm going to present a couple of points which are relatively new, and therefore would require actually a little more time to explain this, but we have many speakers. So I'm told by Mr. Borker that I have about 20 minutes or so, 15 to 20 minutes. So it's 6:13 now, so I would say till about 6:35 or just shortly before that, right? And caste hegemony. That's one question. The second question is there a bulwark against caste hegemony built into the Constitution? And if so, what is it? And the third question is, what has been the impact of that bulwark? Is it still holding strong or has it been breached? So these are the three questions, and I'll go about it very quickly and mention some important ideas. Happy to discuss it later here or separately. The first question is, what is caste? And there, the interesting thing is that after all these years of wrestling with this word called caste and its two underlying concepts of Varna and Jati, there is really no clear definition of what is caste. And many people are still writing about it in many different ways. And to be fair to him, in his book, Caste and Race in India, Professor Gurrier had said very clearly that it is too complex and it cannot be defined. And so I don't think anyone has come up with a clear definition, which may be okay for the sociologists, anthropologists, experts in language and literature, who are the people who most engage with the struggle of defining it. But it's not okay for me as a lawyer, because I have to deal with the issue of caste from a very precise point of view of rights, liabilities, and disabilities in courts of law. So we need to have greater clarity. But very broadly speaking, because of lack of time, I think if you look at all the definitions that are there, I can put them into two broad baskets. One approach is taxonomical. From Dumont and all these people, it's a taxonomical approach. They look at caste as a method of dividing people into different groups. They try to to classify these groups into different categories and understand them, find out what's in common. Like you classify animals and plants. You want to find a classification system for society. And then they note the behavior of those groups. There is some hierarchy, there is exploitation, and so they make observations. So this is one basket, which is taxonomical. But there's no consistent taxonomical view. And unlike plants and animals, strangely, where Linnaeus has developed some, for plants, an approach that has gained wide acceptance, we still don't have a taxonomy that is accepted, which can explain caste. On the other hand, there are people like Babasaheb Ambedkar, Narayana Guru, Jyotiba Phule, and many others who look at caste from a very different point of view. They look at it to identify its very negative impacts on people and on society. They're not trying to develop a taxonomy. They're trying to tell people this is a horrible system and we have to end it. So one after the other, for especially 19th century, they've been documenting the negativities of the system. And actually many of them, including Dr. Ambedkar, has put forward very clear ideas. They have no confusion about what caste is because they're at the receiving end of caste discrimination. It's like you may not need much theory to explain to a woman what misogyny is, because the woman has experienced it. For men, it may be a little more of a challenge to understand it. Similarly, for these people, there is no difficulty in understanding what is caste. So Babasaheb, for example, identifies mainly in his Annihilation of Caste and in other writings 6 or 7 features of caste, which are which are very damaging not only to those who are excluded by it, but to all of society. So endogamy, the division of laborers, not just division of labor. Famously, he said that this is a system of division of laborers, graded inequality, the hierarchy, the exclusion, the inefficiency of forcing people by birth into vocations without caring about what their skills and capacities are, ascribing to them a set of capacities called gunas simply because they're born into some womb and not another womb. And he says this is an utterly inefficient way of organizing society, in addition to being inhuman. He says it degrades the masses, denying them education, knowledge, skills, and opportunity, degrades the people. And then therefore he says caste has ruined the country, and the way it has to go. Narayana Guru is a person who has come up with a very clear theorization of what jati and varna is, which has not been much noticed in the country, and that is extremely useful. Narayana Guru says jati means janma riti, method of birth. And if you go into the Sanskrit etymology, it is a combination of jan plus tin, katin, half ka and ta, tin. Like kr plus tin, it's a noun verb, gets kriti. So jan plus tin gives you jati. It's a phenomenon plus the noun verb and an outcome or a product of that. So it is a group that shares a common birth. That's clear. Now there are 2 approaches to how to create a classification based on the basis of types of birth. One is what is in the Purusha Sukta Rig Veda, where they say there are 4 different methods of birth, as we know, head and shoulder and thighs and feet and so on. But Narayana Guru says there is only one method of birth for all human beings. So he says, in Malayalam, he says, Uru Jati Manishana, one Jati for all human beings. And he writes saying there is no one in the world who does not know that human beings are born from a woman's womb in one form, and there is only one method of birth for all human beings, except Brahmanadis, Brahmins, etc. And he says, ha kashtam, hey, what a pity that they don't know this. Everyone in the world knows that all of us. So he doesn't say there's no jati, he says all humans have one method of birth. We are one species, basically. And he says everyone in the world knows this. Then what is varna? So we know that jati is created in the Rig Veda because the Rig Veda says there are 4 methods of birth, whereas Narayana Guru says the whole world knows there's only one jati. What is then varna? So derived from this, what we understand is that jati is mentioned in the Rig Veda without any description. It describes methods of birth of earth and sky and animals and various things, just methods of birth, but no description. There's no method of birth for a human being in Purusha Sukta. So, but later on, a description comes about the status, responsibilities, duties, privileges of these 4 categories which are mentioned in the Rig Veda: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. And that is a Varnan, description. So Varna is the description of the qualities, characteristics, social and political rights and responsibilities of these 4 jatis. And so that is where the graded inequality and all that comes from the Varna theory. That is, it is according to guna and karma, and how does it's a description. So very importantly, what we learn from Narayana Guru is Jati and Varna are the same thing. These are two words being used about the same phenomenon of something that is born, and the description of what is born. So they're not 2 separate things. But the entire literature proceeds on the assumption that jati refers to the samudaya or communities of common people, of which there are thousands and thousands, and varna is something which is only the attribute of 4 categories of people. But the link between these 2 concepts, according to Guru, actually is, from that we can understand an explanation for the caste system which is significant from the legal point of view. What is that? You can understand the caste system as actually, first of all, to borrow from Dr. Ambedkar, if we accept his prediction in 1913, the Roundtable Conference, that India will be ruled by an oligarchy after the British leave, we can understand the caste system basically as an oligarchy. And what is the nature of that oligarchy? That oligarchy consists of 4 jatis. And Varna is the description of the powers and status of that oligarchy. And what does that oligarchy do? It basically creates 5 categories from a legal point of view. I'm not saying this from a sociological or economic or from my discipline's point of view. From a legal point of view, it creates 5 categories of citizenship. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, which we know, plus 5, which is nota, none of the above. Right? The nota category and 4 categories which we all know. And why are they categories of citizenship? Because each category has a distinct set of privileges, rights, and responsibilities. Political, economic, civil, political, and economic rights. You can have this power, you can read, you cannot read, you can sit here, you can do that job. So each category is a category of citizenship with hierarchical set of rights, unequal rights. And the 5th category, the nota category, is a category where there are no rights at all. No rights at all. So that's a residual category. If you're not born into these 4 categories, then you have no rights. Even if you're Muslim, Christian, whatever you are, if you're not born into these 4 categories, you are in the nota category. If you're in the nota category, you have no rights. You can be given privileges and that can be taken away, but you have no rights. You can be given equality, you can take away equality, you can be given privilege, that can be taken away, but there are no rights at all. So we understand the system, the oligarchy, as constituted by these 4 categories of citizenship, 5 categories of citizenship, and the power maintained by the 4 categories, and the 5th category being the residual category where no one has any rights. Now, what is categorized are the social groups, which are now called jatis wrongly, according to the Narayana Guru framework. They are just social groups. They're not, they're just communities, samudaya. So in this oligarchic system, there are 3 pillars. And now I'm segueing into how the constitution destroys this system. There are 3 pillars to this oligarchy called caste. First pillar is there's no recognition legally of individual rights. In this caste-based Varna oligarchy, there are no individual rights. Even if you're in category 1, you have no individual rights. All your rights are group rights. The second pillar is that you are born into a family. That family is part of a social group. Mandatorily, your social group is the group of the family into which you're born. Into which you're born. Okay, so that's the second pillar. Mandatory social identity of the group into which you're born. Number 2. Number 3 is that each social group is categorized into one of these 5 categories of citizenship. Each community. So you cannot directly be a Brahmin. You have to be born into a Nambudiri social group, or a Dwivedi or Trivedi, or a Pulaya or Paraya. You can't get directly into Nota either. It's the social group that gets categorized into these into one of these in citizenship categories, and all your rights depend on the categorization. So tomorrow, if Nambudiri gets recategorized as 5, all their rights are gone. If the Shankaracharyas call a press conference and say, sorry guys, we made a big mistake. Nambudiri is actually Nota and not 1. We looked at all our papers. Somebody made a mistake. Sorry. That whole community is finished, because their sacred thread will be taken away. They'll be thrown out of their homes and jobs and works. They'll have to do manual scavenging, and they're finished. So the power is in the category. So caste is an oligarchy that is maintained by a system of categorizing social group into these 5 categories. It's alarmingly simple, and you can do this in Norway. You just go in there and say, all your social groups will now be put in these 5 categories, and all your individual rights are extinguished, and all of your rights will depend upon where your social group gets categorized, 1, 2, 3, 4, or Nota, right? Now, I segue into the second part of the question. I have only another 8 minutes left, but this is the more new part of the presentation. In the Constitution, Babasaheb Ambedkar destroys these 3 pillars. First of all, using the Constitution, I don't think anyone in the Constituent Assembly except he and the Dalit colleagues in that room knew what was going on. First of all, with the consensus of most people in the assembly, but fighting against a lot of them, using international consensus in his favor, he gives everyone equal individual rights and makes the individual the fundamental unit of citizenship and of society. Puts the individual right at the top, whereas the individual doesn't even exist under the caste oligarchy. The second thing he does is he destroys this mandatory social identity or group identity by bringing in freedom of association. So you can reject the community into which you're born and choose to become, that's where conversion comes in. Anything, you can choose to be Nota, none of the above, you can join any community you want. So it makes the membership of social groups based on consent and not obligatory on birth. So that pillar is gone. And the third pillar is gone because he completely destroys any group rights or privilege in categories 1, 2, 3, 4. So no one can walk into this room and say, I'm category 1, please let me speak, you wait till I finish, right? And there are no group rights. But those who are in the Nota category with absolutely no rights, they get some group rights. The highest to the tribals, then the scheduled castes, some to some OBCs. Why? Because they have to be protected, because they had absolutely no rights, either group or individual before that. They were not even recognized as human beings in this framework. So they have some group rights. So he turns this whole caste oligarchy on its head. On top of that, he brings in the idea of representative democracy. Right from 1930, in the Roundtable Conference, he says that we want representative democracy because he said we are going to be ruled by an oligarchy. And so we want due and adequate representation of all communities. The word classes and backward classes came into the Constitution in the Constituent Assembly. But in the Roundtable Conference, Dr. Ambedkar was speaking in his own words on behalf of the depressed classes. There he used the language due and adequate representation of all communities. Right? Due, according to population share, adequate to protect the smaller communities. It must be effective. If you're very small, due may not be enough. So you have to be given a little more. So due and adequate representation of all communities in the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And that will disperse the oligarchy. And that's the quickest and most effective way to disperse the oligarchy. And for that, reservation was a tool. And a census which prevailed then was a necessity in order to implement the idea of representative democracy. But this agenda of this, now I come into the last part, I have only 5 minutes left or 4 minutes left, come into the last part, which is the counter-revolution against so the Bulwark, this I'm not going to go through, but there are 20 specific provisions in the Constitution, which I call, borrowing from George Bush and company, referring to weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I use the phrase weapons of caste destruction, that Dr. Ambedkar put 20 very powerful instruments of caste destruction are in the Constitution. I have them, I can discuss them, but if I do that, I won't complete my talk, so I'm not going to do it. But let me assure you that there are 20 very specific, very powerful weapons of caste destruction he has put into the Constitution. Now, Constitution is not self-executing. We have to use it ourselves. This is like an armory. We have to go there and take the weapons and use them peacefully, of course. These are weapons of law and not of violence, and they should be used in courts and in public discourse. So then, what is a counter-revolution? The counter-revolution basically had two elements to it. One is it destroyed the agenda of representative democracy, and second, it has changed the form of caste. That's the last point I'll make. Change the form in which caste operates. Now, if you look at this oligarchy, it's essentially, caste is the name of an oligarchy. An oligarchy means a small group of people must control power. That substance has not changed. But 75 years ago, 100 years ago, you operated that by saying, if you were born into a community, you can rule. If not, you cannot rule. That was the way it was operated. Today, that has changed. Now, what is modern caste? Like we talk of modern slavery, what is modern caste? Modern caste operates on two or three main points. One of these is it has changed the sorting and selecting system to make sure that only the oligarchy controls power. And so they are now using the word merit rather than birth. Now, what is merit? Merit is, you got to be like me. So I control the examinations, I control the curriculum, I control the testing, I control the axiology that decides who will be selected and on what basis, what is valued, and make sure that it mirrors me. So that's why if you look at any of the institutions in the country, 4 communities basically control all the resources in this country. The bulk of it, just 4 communities. And you go to each state, you got 2 or 3 communities. The same people who were powerful 75 years ago are still powerful. But now they're saying this is not because we are born into a community, this is because we have merit. But what they've done is they've controlled the selection system to make sure that the oligarchy continues. So merit has become the new operating system for maintaining caste domination. And caste is found today in this monopoly of these 4 communities. That's how we get evidence that caste still lives, because that's the essence of caste. As long as 3 or 4 communities control all parts of life, caste exists. But it is, as I said, using different names to justify itself. And then, of course, to justify this existence in this idea of merit is the most powerful modern day expression of the caste system. And because we don't talk of competence, there are no criteria. Take High Court judges or Supreme Court judges. I'll conclude with that. We have no criteria no definition of what are the qualities we need for a good High Court judge or a Supreme Court judge. But we say it is selection based on merit. What is the result? In my state, in Kerala, there have been 18 people from Kerala who become Supreme Court judges in the last 75 years. 14 of them come from just 3 small communities. And you can do this analysis elsewhere as well. But this is all in the name of merit. But what is merit? How do you define it? Who tests it? There is no accountability for that. And the word we need now is competence, not merit, because merit is too close to the idea of guna, which is the basis of caste. So I think within the time I've touched on these 3-4 ideas that there is caste hegemony. Caste is still here with us because caste is basically an oligarchy where the same 3 or 4 communities monopolize power and resources. And as long as that continues, that is the caste system. That monopoly is the caste system. So it's very much with us. But it is presented itself and operating itself in different ways. The bulwark constructed by Dr. Ambedkar, by demolishing the pillars of the caste system, have forced them to change the operating system and find new ways to maintain their oligarchy. There are instruments in the constitution to tackle those new ways, but that has been attacked by the counter-revolution against the annihilation of caste. Instead of caste being annihilated, what has been annihilated is the annihilation of caste. The anti-caste movement has been annihilated. And so we have to find a way to reverse that, because frankly, today there is no space, and I'm very grateful, I'll conclude with that, to Mr. Borker for creating space for this discussion. But there is no place in this country to discuss the caste monopoly. If the moment you do it, you say you are tribal, you're casteist, you're dividing the country, but you can't challenge the oligarchy. But when you tell them that caste is an oligarchy, it's a political system, it's not a religious system or a social system, it's a form of government. Like monarchy is a form of government, oligarchy is a form of government. And just as you had to destroy the monarchy in Russia or China for a revolution to take place, unless you destroy the political form of government called oligarchy, we are not going to be able to change anything in this country. But there is no space at all to discuss this. I'm grateful for having been given this space, and I think, about a couple of minutes over time, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohan, to put things into such a clear perspective. I mean, of oligarchies, of merit versus competence, and then of how the new battles have to be fought, because they have changed the entire framework, and I mean, caste may be a bad word, but the oligarchy somehow has managed to transcend the bulwarks made by Ambedkar. Now we'll go to Sumeet Mhaskar, who's actually been recorded, self-recorded at Amsterdam airport, where there was a flight confusion, and he's going to tell us about that Babasaheb's vision still is a vital shield. Can we play that recording, please?
May Day greetings, everyone. I would like to thank Suhas Borker for inviting me to this event, and I would also like to congratulate him for organizing this event on May Day for the last 15 years. The topic of today's discussion is about Indian Constitution and how that has been working as a bulwark against the caste hegemony. The topic of caste hegemony is like the elephant in the room that several mainstream scholars as well as media outlets have been hesitant to talk about. Therefore, this event is special as it directly deals with the issue of caste hegemony and the role of Constitution in mitigating it. The Indian Constitution inaugurated a new era of modern liberal democratic framework whereby we have recognized the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value, as Dr. Ambedkar stated in the Constituent Assembly on 25th November 1949. That is, each adult citizen has right to one vote and their vote have the same value. irrespective of their gender background, their caste background, their religious background, their economic status. Each vote has absolutely the same value. Similarly, in the economic arena, each citizen has the right to pursue their choice of professions or jobs. Culturally and socially, too, all individuals are free to engage in social relations and carry forward their cultural practices. These modern rights directly came in conflict with the caste-based norms and unequal rights that have been historically assigned to individuals from top to the bottom. In terms of economy, there have been more choices at the top and fewer choices at the bottom. Socially, it has been a life of exclusion and oppression at the bottom, segregation in living, exclusion from schools, and very little political voice, if at all. Due to these unequal rights in social, economic, political, and cultural arenas, the socially superior castes enjoyed greater rights and held a hegemonic position. These groups have sought to retain their hegemonic position by subverting the rights of socially marginalized groups. It is due to this reason the right to be treated equally, and most importantly, the right not to be discriminated against on the basis of caste, religion, and genders remain a far distant dream for millions in India. Even after 7 decades of democratic republic, equal rights guaranteed by the Indian Constitution to the socially marginalized groups such as the women, Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims, these rights are constantly subverted. Every single day, we have several news reports about caste-based atrocities being inflicted upon Dalits and Adivasis. There are rapes of women for asking due wages, caste killing of Dalit men for marrying socially superior caste women, and Muslims face discrimination on the basis of their religious identity. Economic inequality continues to be a stark reality as well. India is home to the largest number of people living below the international poverty line. Even among the poor, there is a distinction based on their social identity. The United Nations Development Report noted that 50% of the scheduled tribe communities are multidimensionally poor. That is, that they are poor not just because of having less level of financial resources, but on the indicators such as nutrition, health, education, and living standards and assets. Followed by them, 33% of scheduled castes and Muslim communities are multidimensionally poor. And if you look at the socially superior caste, about only 15% are multidimensionally poor. So caste still plays a very important role in the Indian social life. But by and large, we see that there are various ways through which the rights granted to all the citizens, and especially to the socially marginalized groups, have been subverted in various ways. There is a clear violation of these rights. Dr. Ambedkar was deeply aware that there would be conflict between the rights granted by the Constitution and the rights which have been prevalent through the caste-based social order. It is precisely because of these dangers that Ambedkar highlighted in the memorandum and draft articles on the rights of the states and minorities. It is in this document we find the strongest articulation of social and economic rights. Ambedkar was probably the only politician to have prepared such a draft wherein he raised following questions. What kind of economic system should independent India adopt? What kind of social system does India go for? What political system should address social and economic inequality? In state and minorities, Ambedkar proposes remedies against economic exploitation for all castes and communities, and not just for Dalits as it is commonly understood. He also proposed remedies against discrimination for minorities, such as religious minorities, also for women from all social groups, and he proposed remedies against discrimination faced by Dalits on the basis of caste. This is an extremely important aspect, but largely ignored. So you can take several aspects such as the judicial protection against executive tyranny, protection against unequal treatment, discrimination, economic exploitation, social and official tyranny, social boycotts. So there are various ways in which draft prepared by Ambedkar actually addressed these problems. And therefore, while everyone was talking about equality in social, political, and economic spheres, it was Ambedkar who wanted to talk about remedies. Ambedkar believed that merely providing formal equal rights to all its citizens is not even enough. He was aware that the highly privileged higher castes and classes would deny them to the lower strata of society. Law, therefore, should provide remedies against the invasion of fundamental rights. Ambedkar said in the Constituent Assembly that all of us are aware that rights are nothing unless remedies are provided, whereby people can seek to obtain redress when rights are invaded. Article 32 of the Indian Constitution provides the right to all citizens of the country to approach the Supreme Court if their fundamental rights and constitutional privileges are violated by any state institution or individual. Ambedkar considered this provision to be the very soul and heart of the Constitution. It is important to note that Supreme Court later declared Article 32 as part of basic structure of the Constitution. In the directive principles of state policy enumerated in Part 4 of the Indian Constitution, and that encompasses Article 36 to 51, Dr. Ambedkar made an effort to protect the interest of the deprived section of the society. Article 46 says that the state shall promote with special care the educational and economic interest of the weaker section of the people, and in particular of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and shall protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. It should also be noted that unlike fundamental rights, directive principles are merely set of instructions to various states to undertake a particular line of action for the benefit of weaker sections. Ambedkar also stressed this fact that directive principles are nothing but obligations imposed by the Constitution upon various governments in the country. Though, if the government fails to carry them out, no one can ask for their specific performance. And yet, today we have the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act, we have the SC/ST sub-plan in the budget, you have various kind of policies taken up by the state, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, the right to food, right to education. There are several kind of provisions which are part of the directive principles of the state policy. So these are the different ways in which the modern Indian citizen continue to exercise their rights with remedies against the violation. And without these remedies, these rights would have been meaningless. And the rights assigned by the Constitution of India and the remedies against violation are the major bulwark against the caste hegemony in India. And this particular aspect, I believe, is also the main part of today's discussion. I hope that there will be a good discussion. Sadly, I don't think I will be able to participate in the discussion because of the flight timings. And it is precisely for that reason I am recording this lecture. And thank you very much once again, Suhas Borker for this invitation. And I hope to interact with everyone in person in some future. Thank you very
much. Thank you, Sumeet, in absentia. But you've put things in. I mean, the vision of Ambedkar and with the remedies. But the remedies don't seem to be working. That's the problem. So we now go to Professor Vidhu Verma. At a time when the Constitution is seen as a language of protest, as well as a language of failed liberalism, what is the political that Ambedkar had imagined in the Constitution? Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you so much for the invitation, Dr. Suhas. It's been really a great occasion to be here. It's very special for me that I should be part of this discussion. I'm going to take the discussion a little away from what we have been discussing so far, I thought I would look into the whole idea of constitutionalism. And there's always been a lot of anxiety about constitution and constitutionalism in the last few decades. So I thought we could think a little bit about that. What is the relevance of Ambedkar's thought in the current context? See, there's been a lot of anxiety since I think Constitution emerged in response to despotism. But the period coinciding with the end of the Cold War saw a tremendous rise in constitutionalism. And then after 9/11, and also especially after the global financial crisis, there has been a marked decline in constitutionalism with concerns over the rise of executive powers and various forms of authoritarianism across the world. And in India, I think we are also witness to what I've called as a anti-constitutionalism, a popular constitutionalism in legislation that assumes a kind of popular mandate in parliament. It dispenses with the procedures of interpreting constitution altogether. It becomes very close to what Tully has said in a different context. It's an executive constitutionalism. It divorces power from the constitutional constraints that historically give legitimacy to the government. It pays little attention to specifics of legal argument and doesn't care much about separation of powers. It has deep distrust of institutions, and it also, and in this sense, the political takes over the legal, with the judiciary being harnessed to serve the former, and the people being treated as a legal subject in their own right. This whole idea about the direct connect with the people. And with that, we have an idea of a monoethnic, monocultural, purified people which are coming together and participating in a democracy, concepts which are very alien to the constitutional language that we have. And in public debates, I find that there's a semantic appropriation of constitutionalism in ways that could be contested. So demonstrations, assemblies, boycotts, strikes are seen as non-constitutional, even when they do not seek recourse to questioning the Constitution. And when states or institutions do this, when they start renaming practices as unconstitutional, I think they're conducting a political war at the level of public semantics. So the state misuses language to secure its monopoly on violence through maligning opposition, through justifying its power on those who seek to exercise and define freedom in different ways, and as provided by the fundamental rights of the Constitution. On the other side, we find subaltern groups, activists, scholars. They look to constitutionalism as a means of advancement, of rights, and also to counter majoritarianism. But this makes central the capacities of the state structures and techniques of power. And the preamble was the first time I saw so many people chanting it, and a few years ago when we had many social movements across India. But the solution to identify vulnerable groups and offer them protection has given rise to new security rationales and produced paternalistic power, and also given authority to regulatory agencies which have interests of their own. So at a time when the Constitution is seen as part of the language of a failed liberalism and a language of protest, I find that both responses risk conceding the failure of constitutionalism. So we need to come out of this impasse and I think recall the ideas of Ambedkar. And I do that by looking at his ideas and relating the social and the political, because there's so much, what can talk about. And already we have had a discussion on caste, which I'm going to now avoid, because I think we have already gone through that. So in the little time that I have, I'm just going to submit to you that I think Ambedkar's innovations in the Constituent Assembly and in the Constitution had a very profound, constructive impact on the legal journey of the post-colonial state. but his substantive role has been minimized by the critiques made by popular constitutionalism. Subaltern groups have created political space for Ambedkar's interpretation of the Constitution, but I still think that many new questions come up in this context, and I'm going to try looking at those. When we look at the Constitution, I think the first question would be, what were the Constitution goals? And when we look for those goals, we find that many of Ambedkar's desired, his desired outcomes have failed to materialize, especially the condition of the Dalits. So I will briefly comment on his idea of constitutionalism before going into his interventions. Now, there are three aspects, I thought, which we could, kind of think about. First, I think in a very narrow sense, constitutionalism explores the idea that government can and should be legally limited in its powers, and its authority or legitimacy depends on observing those limitations. Very Lockean kind of understanding of political power. But he also argues that if meaningful limitation is possible, then somehow we have to see that this is entrenched. What does it mean? It means that a government can be self-limiting, because the government makes the law, and how do you expect that it will be self-limiting in that process? But he does raise the question that it means that somewhere those who are to be limited have to abide by or are obliged to observe these things. That's a very central aspect of being entrenched. The other aspect of Ambedkar, which many scholars have written about, is emancipatory constitutionalism, which means that not only are we talking about legislative, executive, judicial powers to be separate, but we're also saying that there are certain norms which impose significant limit on these powers. So limitations can be in the form of civil rights given to individuals. We can have a discussion on scope of authority. So he talks about federal system and state governments, how they have different kinds of powers. He has a lot of interest in mechanisms or procedures used in exercising relevant power. So this is the way constitutionalism, in his view, becomes a more kind of wider term, instead of the narrower one earlier, which I had mentioned. And finally, I think for him, constitutionalism is a name of a trust, which people repose in the power of a document as a means of controlling a government. It is a legal device for the prevention of tyranny and for the protection of rights of the people. And because he was also very influenced by American Constitution, especially James Madison, I think he had in mind what Madison said, that in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, women didn't matter that time, men over men, it is necessary to oblige it to control itself. That's what it means to talk about constitutionalism. So I think with this idea, with these 3 points, I just want to quickly go to the interventions he makes. I don't think I will have time. Dr. Borker, please stop me 5 minutes before and tell me how much time I have. Okay. So he has 3, I think, important speeches which help us to understand what he had in mind. The first is, of course, the famous speech in 1949, which talks about the contradictions between political democracy and social life. I think many of us are aware of it, but I would still like to take it up, because that's where he says that political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of its social democracy. And what does social democracy mean? It means that we value liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life, and they must always underpin political democracy. But he's very clear that we must first strike the balance between liberty and equality. And once we do that, then we move on to fraternity, or the feeling of friendship and mutual support. So he's kind of linking this understanding of political democracy It's not about elections. It's not about only constitutional safeguards, which are there, but he's trying to develop an intuitive understanding and belief in the minds and hearts of the Indian people here. There's another speech where he says, he's very speculative about defining democracy, being government by the people, for the people, and so on. And he asks, what kind of people are we talking about? Are they rational or are they irrational? Are they compassionate or are they full of hatred? All this shapes the outcome of the government by the people. And that is why he repeatedly called democracy as a mode of associated living. It was very close to his vision of a good society. And through this process, he wants us to critically examine our values as we take this journey to political democracy. So I think he has a very radical notion of equality. I don't think he was referring to some liberal notion of sameness and so on, and only about procedural democracy. He wanted to understand that it involves a profound understanding of the nature of power and how that power pervades our everyday world. And to that extent, I think he always argued that democracy is at a risk, right? And it is always at the mercy of demagogues. And because he knew that these risks of liberal democracy are real, he always said that we must address these challenges in our democratic life. The third speech, which I often think of and which has been mentioned, I think, by our former speaker also, but I'm just linking it up to the roundtable conferences where, this is one of the, it might have been raised earlier, but I remember it's in one of those where he said that fundamental right enacted in the Constitution should declare untouchability to be illegal for all public purposes. So within the Constituent Assembly, there was widespread agreement that you need to criminalize the practice of untouchability. And so I think this, the Article 17 is a major contribution that, as you said, that, you are putting the entire oligarchy on its head by saying that we need to abolish untouchability, despite there being many problems. I'm sure in our discussion, we can take that act up. And since, and after that, he also was very involved with the Protection of Civil Rights Act in 1955. He did try to give his views in the Rajya Sabha when he found that others, as he said, were not very keen. He worked very hard on implementing that. We take all these acts and all these rights for granted. But I think a lot of effort, a lot of struggle, negotiation was going on in the Constituent Assembly and later also in Parliament. So what is Ambedkar's role in producing this imagination of the Constitution, that it has once again become a part of our public discourse, and what are the challenges? I think that today, I just round them up by looking at 4 challenges quickly. I think the first has already been mentioned, so I'm just going to briefly mention it as the challenge of liberal legalism. It's all about how I find that group justice has been always central to the political discourse of the Indian state through reservation policies, laws against untouchability and the atrocity laws. And the classification of groups into scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, etc., has led to the creation of juridical categories. Unfortunately, these categories don't question the humiliation and stigmatization of caste in everyday practices. But definitely, what happens is that these juridical categories allow us to kind of translate them or give them the public policies that they're entitled to. But there's something more, that there's impunity which is inbuilt into our legal structures. So despite these acts, we find that there is no major effort to really maybe even submit an FIR. Convictions are very low. We are all aware of the way caste slurs are sometimes just set aside. People are threatened. So caste prejudice has established a climate of fear. And we know the cases of Hathras and Una and so many other incidents, the crime The NCRB has told us how the number of rapes has increased, especially amongst Dalit women, and in general, how crimes have increased. So we are living in a period of a lot of violence. We are living in a period when anybody can be killed. We have Pahalgam as a good example. And I agree that there's a general fear about that. But there are certain groups which are more vulnerable than others. And therefore, I think, for example, Dalit women who live in a climate where they are terrorized all the time, and they are, what I would say, in a status where they are killable, right? Or they are the ones who get targeted more than any other. So liberal legalism and its limits is there for all us to see. Second is law and custom. You know, Ambedkar himself said that custom is no small thing as compared to law. And he challenged us to rethink what law is in the Indian context. And you know, we have to ask ourselves, what rules compel us to behave in a particular way? And he says that it's very difficult or impossible to implement the law in the context when the offenders are not a few persons, but the entire society. The third challenge is related to that he argued that we cannot possibly defy an entire community. So he raises the question of moral conscience, social conscience, and that gets away from the Constitution then. And like Edmund Burke, he says, there is no method found for punishing the multitude. So how do you punish the multitude? Law can punish a single solitary criminal. It cannot operate against a whole body of people who are determined to defy it. So I think he anticipated this resistance. You can have as many laws as you want to, but caste remains entrenched. In fact, caste discrimination emerges in newer forms, as the earlier speakers have shared with you, that with the market and with neoliberalization, we find it has new face for us in housing and in jobs, and we find that it carries on. Fourth, of course, challenges of constitutional morality, which all of us, again, are familiar with. I think he was, again, voicing a concern, which is very relevant today. And he said that, you know, the diffusion of constitutional morality is very important because somewhere, I'm trying to get that paragraph where he says, it is perfectly possible to pervert the Constitution. It's a very, I'm sure all of us are familiar with that, without changing its form, by merely changing the form of the Constitution and to make it inconsistent and opposed to the spirit of the Constitution. Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people have yet to learn it. So that's a very kind of tall order. And, you know, that we still have to learn what constitutional morality is all about. And I think we are still in this learning process, trying to figure out what his fears were about the future. And finally, of course, we have the great debate on social justice linked to the census, which has just been announced by the state today. I don't know which direction it will go. My own position in my writing has been that, yes, there is a classical grammar of social justice, which is there in the Constitution, which clearly mandates reservations for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And the justification is caste discrimination, social discrimination, geographical isolation. And from the 90s, of course, we had the Mandal Commission on the grounds of their socio-economic as well as their social, economic, and educational backwardness. But I think in recent years, we have got a new category, EWS, which has also been introduced. Now, census is a good idea, but I can foresee there will be competing data because we all know what census means. Census is used to, when we identify certain groups to be beneficiaries of a policy, we have to show adequate data, whether they are backward and so on or not. So there will be, I guess, at the state level, at the central level, I can see these kind of battles going on. And the other thing is that we need to be careful. See, in the past, the demand for enumeration can also be seen as a demand for recognition of a past, of a discrimination and so on, which you want to overcome. But here it's a state-directed policy. It's suddenly a state-directed kind of directive, and state-directed, injunction that we have got, that we are going to have census. But I believe that in the past, we have had social movements which have actually argued for a particular kind of recognition. So we must separate the two without kind of collapsing them. And of course, then social justice as a concept has been part of our imagination for over 200 years. But I think this classical grammar, as I said, of social justice has been questioned. I find that there are new subjects of justice today due to the intersectionality, due to new groups like Dalit Muslims, Dalit Christians, women have emerged as subjects of justice. And because of this, there's suddenly this competition amongst the beneficiaries as to, how we are going to go about this. And I think for that, we need to have discussion rather than all these directives from the state. There are also new sites of justice, which were not there earlier, an extraction of mineral resources, which is involving the kind of displacement of so many Adivasis. We have a large a kind of army of informal labor living in precarity and so on. So the idea of discrimination itself has widened to include non-caste discrimination. So these are challenges. Ambedkar, of course, has given us many ideas to overcome this, but I think I will end by saying that caste and caste discrimination is not disappearing. In fact, it might have strengthened in the last few years as it acquires newer forms and new kinds of contradictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Vidhu. There's some key words which I picked up. Nature of power, at the mercy of a demagogue. Then you also mentioned, though you didn't call it that, how do you control majoritarianism? How do you control it? If everybody is into that fold, how can you control it? Because you have to find new methods. The Constitution has to find. Anyway, thank you very much. Now, I think if we can go to Achyut. Achyut, are you there? Yeah. Now, Achyut is going to talk about casteist hegemony in the context of Adivasis. He's very much there at a public university in Jharkhand, Dumka. And you'll be talking to us about the ground realities as a practitioner now. As an academic in a Adivasi community, the problems you're facing. Over to you, Chetan.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah. I might also mention that you've done a seminal work on mothers of the Indian Constitution. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Borker, and thank you everyone who is present there. I'm speaking from Dumka, so I don't know if you know about the place or not. I must just give you a very brief statistics. Dumka is one of the poorest districts in Jharkhand. If you look at the per capita income of India, the state average, the per capita income of Jharkhand is half of that. And that of Dumka is half of the state average. So it's like 1/4 of the national per capita income. This is something that we need to keep in mind. I will speak very briefly. I don't know, my claim to be here is because I believe I have written a book on the Constitution, on the making of the Constitution, and hence constitutionalism as a bulwark against casteist hegemony, but also because I teach in a place where I think the Constitution is more important, and the Constitution plays a much more significant role than it does in many other places. Since we've been talking about caste, and I will also talk about caste, I will talk about tribes also. So I'll keep my talk very, very brief. There will be many anecdotes. I will not have many theories here, but I'll try to refresh your mind about what happens in a classroom. The report that I will largely present here will be from a classroom. But there's a particular distinction that I'd like to make at the very outset. People who study in JNU or people who study in IIT Kanpur are different from people who study in a university in Dumka or Bhagalpur or Jabalpur, or maybe even smaller places like Puraiyahat or Sri Perumbudur. The difference is that these institutions, the ones I mentioned earlier, JNU and IIT Kanpur, or maybe many other such institutions, are not organic institutions. The professors and the students probably don't know very much about what happens in Munirka. I just did a Google search and I found out that IIT Kanpur is situated in a suburb called Kalyanpur. And I don't think students who study in IIT Kanpur, whether they study humanities or social sciences, have anything to do with what happens in Kalyanpur. But unfortunately in India, the large number of public institutions that we have, I mean, if you do a very quick count, it would be no less than 10,000. I'm just talking about colleges and universities, which are organic in the sense that the institutions are located in places where they get from where they draw their teachers and from where the students come to study. Are organic in the sense that whatever happens in the society, whatever happens in the community affects the classroom, affects the work, affects the teaching that happens there, and so on. Since it's the 1st of May, I think it's also important to remember the concept of organic intellectual, which has also been used for Dr. Ambedkar on various occasions, a Gramscian concept. Just keep in mind two senses in which one can use the term organic intellectuals, because we talk a lot about power. The first is the sense in which I've already mentioned. An organic intellectual is one who is socially embedded in the society and does a kind of a thinking from within. And in a second sense, an organic intellectual or an organic institution would also have an organizational value. I can go back to the same quote, the 1949 25th November speech of Dr. Ambedkar, when he talks about a democracy when we enter into a life of contradictions. One has to think about these two institutions also in terms of the contradictions that we have. Students who are born in a village, who are born in a forest area in Jharkhand, do not have the luxury to go to Delhi or to go to Bombay or to go to Calcutta for their studies. And my question is not whether they have the luxury or not. My point is that they should not be made to go to these places. They should get their education, they should get their health care in the same place where they are born. Migration for the purpose of education is also a form of, I think, disparity, a kind of stratification that happens. I speak from an experience of almost 2 decades of teaching. I'll quickly tell you about the changes that I have noticed in the classrooms. Since we talked about power relations, we talked about caste. The one thing that we have noticed in my own college, where I began teaching in 2007, initially when I taught, or maybe even before that, say when my elder siblings studied in this college, most of the professors were upper caste professors. And the students also came from middle class families. And one can, I don't have statistics, but one can guess that they were also upper caste students, or maybe other backward class students. Students from the lowest of the lowest rung of the society, the tribal groups, the Dalit groups, did not or could not even reach the threshold of a college or a university. With development, with the kind of globalization and neoliberal market that has come up, with the kind of privatization of education that has happened, in the next 20, 30 years, one also needs to remember that Jharkhand was created in the year 2000, along with Chhattisgarh and Uttarakhand. Along with this change, what happened is that students in these classrooms now are mostly from backgrounds which are extremely poor. These are first generation learners. These are students whose parents probably work as laborers. And there are many times when these students are themselves laborers. The class relation in the classroom itself had changed. Now you have, say 20 years back or 30 years back, you had upper caste teachers, middle class teachers teaching upper caste students. Now you have upper caste and some somewhat even group of teachers teaching absolutely lower caste tribal students. What happens to the power relation? It's also very important. I was teaching in Calcutta for some years. I went there. I remember I was thinking of the class dimension of my own location. So I was probably the poorest in the college. My salary was probably half the salary of most of my students' parents. My students' parents, their income was much more than what I earned as a professor. Whereas in a small town or in a place like these organic institutions, a teacher's class is much, much higher than that of your students. The students come from not just poor caste backgrounds, but also very poor class backgrounds. The power relations change absolutely. What happens to the teaching? For a teacher, I believe I have two commitments. I have commitments to my students, and I have also commitment to my discipline. I teach humanities, I teach literature, I also teach history, but that's not my official brief. I also teach some political science because I do constitutional research. But my primary teaching is humanities. I'll give you just two examples. The first thing is very clear that while the demography of the classroom keeps changing and has changed radically over the last 70 years in these places, the curriculum of the classroom, the syllabi, has not changed a lot. The syllabus remains the same. What happens when there is a contradiction between who you are teaching and what you are teaching? That's a very important thing to remember. If you look at the arguments that the government gives, it's a very important argument that the government gives, that in states like Jharkhand, in states like public universities, the enrollment ratios have grown, has risen very high. And so now you have almost all these colleges, all these universities in the public colleges, public universities in these areas, you have almost full enrollment. What does this mean? This will clearly mean, and I just want, this is important to remember, that the Adivasis study in an Adivasi college. The Adivasis study in an Adivasi university. My university is also called Sido, Kanhu, Murmu University. It's almost a kind of a taxonomy that a university is named after two tribal leaders, and the university is also classified as a tribal university, where the professors may not be tribal, but the students are mostly tribal. It becomes very important then to know what is it that we are teaching the tribal students. Delhi University, you don't have tribal students. Calcutta University, Presidency University, St. Xavier's, you don't have tribal students. But if you have many tribal students in universities like Dumka, it clearly begs the question as to what are you teaching these tribal students? Are they getting good education or not? I've already mentioned, and because we're talking about hegemony here, that the change in the curriculum is probably the most difficult to make in such places. I'll give you just three examples. Most of the students, I mean, this is an example that I'll probably not name, but one of my research scholars, not my research scholars, one of the research scholars in our university, a Dalit boy who got a PhD, from this university, who got a JRF, worked on the history of the Brahminical temple that we have here. This is just one example, but you can multiply many such examples. You can look at the syllabi of these universities, and I can vouch that the scene will not change very much if you move from Dumka to Ranchi or Hazaribagh or Dhanbad or maybe to other states as well. Dalit literature or Adivasi histories are still not part of the syllabi in these universities. It's an irony of Indian education system that you teach Dalit literature in St. Stephen's College, but not in places where Dalits actually sit in your classroom. The one example that I'd like to give you is an example from a play that we had staged some 5, 6, I think 8 years ago. Most students are aware of the Shakespearean play Merchant of Venice, which is about a Jewish merchant, Shylock, who is then made to pay his pound of flesh, and who is finally thrown out of the stage, thrown out of the theater. This was a play that we took this trial scene of the Merchant of Venice, and we tried to translate that into Santhali. This is an example that will tell us a lot about how caste systems operate, and I'm trying to maybe build up a different definition of caste in a while on the basis of this. So when the play was going on, we had 3 academics from various parts of India who had visited our campus. And these were very poor tribal students presenting Merchant of Venice in Santhali. And finally, during the last scene of the play, somehow Shylock and the Duke, they forget their dialects. Oh, sorry, I'm running ahead of the story. But anyway, and then the Duke starts beating, kicking Shylock with his boot. A lot of kicks on Shylock, and Shylock keeps begging for to be forgiven, and the Duke keeps on beating him, and there's a lot of clapping and applause around. This is not part of the Shakespearean script. This is not part of the dialogue. And when we realized, the upper caste teachers or the middle class non-tribal teachers, when we realized that the students have forgotten their script or they have probably done something else, they have we need to stop that. So when the applause went on, we said that we are going to close the play. The play was admired widely by the professors who had come from outside. And for them, it was a great opportunity. They saw that, but they could not understand why this has happened. In my introduction, final introduction to the play, to the wrapping up of the whole performance, I said that this probably happened because the Santals have a history of being exploited by merchants. And the first Santhal rebellion of 1855 took place because the Santhal leaders, Sido and Kanhu, after whom our university is named, fought against the merchants who had exploited the Santhal population. So probably it is this great, deep public unconscious, political unconscious, which is ingrained in their mind, that came out in the form of this anger. And one Santhal appropriated the role of a duke who would punish Shylock fully, and Shylock was begging to be forgiven because that is what the political unconscious expected. The point here is that the professors immediately saw in this an opportunity for writing a paper on post-colonial Shakespeare. I'll stop here, not go beyond this, and it was published in a very reputed international journal, and that's where academics stopped. The question here is the question of translation. Of the 7 or 8 tribal languages that we have in this state, only Santhali was recognized by the Constitution of India. That also happened, I think, by the 92nd Amendment to the Constitution, so not before that. The other languages were not here, are still not recognized. For a tribal student to learn English or to learn anything which is in the form of academic, they have to learn Hindi. They have to, first of all, we don't learn their language, but they will learn Hindi, and through Hindi, they might end up learning some English. Now I come to the question of the caste of the teacher. I think I'll just wrap up with 2 minutes. What is the caste of the teacher then? There are two kinds of teachers we have in these classrooms. I did not go into the quality of teaching, which is absolutely dismal and very poor. And as I said, the whole power discourse or the power relation is maintained by keeping a very conservative syllabus, and not just the syllabus, but also by transforming the syllabus into bytes of information to be consumed by the student in the form of MCQ questions at the end of the semester, at the end semester examinations, which takes away completely the possibility of critical thinking on behalf of these tribal and Dalit students. Now, what does the teacher do? What is the caste of the teacher? I would say that no matter who you are, what is your primordial, what is the ascriptive caste identity or tribal identity you come with? When you come with a degree from a university in the metropolis and teach in a university like this, you come as an upper caste person. Your caste is not, or maybe borrowing from the first formulation of the first speaker today, your Varna is of course the Savarna. Or if you have been picked up from the local place, if you're an organic professor, somebody who studied in this university and is also teaching in this university, you have already internalized the politics of asymmetry, the politics of discrimination while you were a student. So you will continue repeating that caste hierarchy in the classrooms. Finally, we come to this very important question. I remember in the debates in the Constituent Assembly, one of the major arguments that Dr. Ambedkar had was about the village system, and he did not like Gandhi's idea of making the village a fulcrum around which justice can be delivered, because for Ambedkar, villages are dense of ignorance. I am using the term village here, or the dense of ignorance here, metaphorically to describe many such organic institutions which are in the heart of these dense of ignorance, where the power structures of these villages, these communities, are directly implanted into the classroom where teaching is done. The other very important question that we need to remember is the question of experience. Here is the experience of a subaltern group, or a Dalit group, or an Adivasi group, that has already been defined by people who have not had this experience. This is not a transparent experience. This is not an experience of belonging to the margin, unless and until you've experienced somebody who has come from the center and who has defined your marginality. The language in which these experiences for our students are described is already a casteist, in the sense in which I'm trying to describe that, is already a casteist experience. But this is not a radical language. This is not a language which will allow these students to think radically or think in terms of emancipation. Thereby, an Adivasi student continues to remain an Adivasi, a Dalit student continues to remain an Adivasi, even after she or he has pursued a degree up to the master's or doctorate level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Achyut, for giving that, Achyut, for that view from Dumka. You know, that's, I think, very critical, because you brought in. I mean, now we've heard of post-colonial fear, which is something out of the world. Thank you very much. Now we go to Subhash Ghatade, who's going to. The constitution is failing, and the haters between political ideals and the social ideals. Yeah, just go ahead. Thank you.
Many thanks, Borker, for this invite. It's an honor to be here to share my views in an august gathering of scholars. This evening is special. Today is 1st May, International Workers' Day, a symbol of struggles for the workers of the world for a life of dignity and free of exploitation. It is also special because we have gathered here to salute a legendary son of the historically excluded people, who later emerged as the leader of the humiliated and oppressed, and how he piloted the making of the Constitution. You'd agree that this is an opportune moment to discuss the Constitution, or even to recollect the historic moment, to comprehend the import of the Indian Revolution unfolding before us, which, according to Nehru, quote, matched the American, French, and Russian in historical meaning, unquote. It is an opportune moment because, under a change dispensation, direct or surreptitious attempts are on to hollow out its meaning, to take us back to the days of Manusmriti, or usher us into a Hindu Rashtra. Our focus in this discussion is limited. We are keen to understand how the Constitution, which laid the foundations of the largest democracy in the world, emerged as a bulwark against casteist hegemony, how it dealt with this, quote, ascending scale of reverence and a descending scale of contempt, quote, unquote. I think there are 4 key points underlining this whole dynamics, which are of importance. 1, we need to understand the making of the Constitution as a distillation of all those conversations, emergent ideas among leading thinking minds of those who laid the historic anti-colonial movement, or who pioneered the social emancipation movements, or who were fired with ideals of socialism, and who envisaged a better future for the country, for the humanity. may it be the 1902 order of Chhatrapati Shahuji Maharaj of the princely state of Kolhapur, which reserved 50% seats in the state for depressed classes, or recommendations of the Nehru report, which was the first major attempt to draft a constitution for independent India, 1928, or the lessons of the workers in Mumbai for guaranteeing minimum wages, or challenge of dealing with communal formations. Everything had shaped the future constitution. These conversations are beneficial because they were slowly shaping the contours of discourse. What future holds for India? Apart from other aspects, a consensus was growing in the conversations that when India wakes up to freedom, it will not only be a parliamentary democracy, but also would guarantee universal adult franchise from day one. It was construed as a method of education of the people and also an empowering tool to the depressed classes who were not only denied education, but other human rights for centuries because of dominant Varna mindset. No doubt these proposals were much against the advice of the established Western scholars and politicians who cautioned us about the dangers of universal adult franchise, or who even proposed some sort of dictatorship for an independent India, pointing out the great failures of the democratic experiments elsewhere. The second point, it was not just a symbolic gesture that the leaders of the anti-colonial struggles and the social emancipatory struggles joined hands to draft a future roadmap for the newly independent India. It was also a way to take forward the earlier conversations. It was really a poetic moment when Dr. Ambedkar, who had penned down a scathing critique of the Congress and Gandhi in the form of a book titled What Congress and Gandhi Had Done for the Untouchables, 1945, was approached by the Congress leadership to join these national efforts of making the constitution. And sensing the need of the hours, Dr. Ambedkar joined these efforts, leaving aside his differences. Apart from other considerations like ensuring better safeguards to the depressed classes, what must have prompted Dr. Ambedkar to join this endeavor? It was crystal clear to him that formations which peddle religion as a basis of nationhood can cause nothing but disaster on both sides of the border. He had penned down about the danger explicitly. Quote, if Hindu Raj does become a fact, it will no doubt be the greatest calamity for this country. Hindu Raj must be prevented at any cost, unquote. Pakistan or partition of India, 1946. The third point, anybody who had closely studied the making of the constitution can vouch that Dr. Ambedkar's agreeing to pilot the draft of the constitution was a game changer of sorts. Congress party, which led the independence struggle, was never an ideologically cohesive organization. It had good sprinkling of conservative, status quo elements in the leadership, and it definitely had dearth of consistent modernist, progressive elements who also had mass following. Dr. Ambedkar's joining these efforts helped tilt the balance in their favor. It in fact helped radicalize the whole process at social level. For example, one can get a glimpse of this if we look at this struggle which ensued after introduction of Hindu Code Bill, which happened to the first attempt in independent India to reform Hindu personal laws to give greater rights to Hindu women. Attempt was made to put a stamp on monogamy and also ensure separation rights to women and also grant them rights in property. In a way, it was a challenge to religion and patriarchy itself, where religion had a monopoly in framing personal laws. With introduction of this bill, this right to frame personal laws was being given to the secular state itself. Looking back, there was no one on the horizon then who had such a deep knowledge of the unique and age-old institution of caste and how this, quote, division of laborers, unquote, has killed human innovation and sapped energies of its people. And when India was awakening to life and freedom, when it was resolving to step out from the old to the new, it was important that decisive steps be taken to deal with this historical wrong called caste and other hegemonies and hierarchies. Right from his days at Columbia University, where he had for the first time theorized caste, he had consistently grappled with the subject, penned down thousands of pages. What was of key importance that he had not limited his critique of caste, patriarchy, or Hindu religion at the level of articles and books, but he had led mass movements to challenge the age-old discrimination. The first one of such mass movement was at Mahad. In Marathi, we fondly call it Mahad Kranti, or when Panyat Aag Lagli Hoti, when water caught fire. It was the first collective articulation of their civil rights and clear resolve to assert them. And these struggles had helped him further clarify his perspective. For example, the resolution read out during the second phase of Mahad Satyagraha, which decided to burn Manusmriti, compared the conference held there with the National Assembly held during historic French Revolution, 5th May 1917-89. They also helped explain him his long-term strategy to fight the menace of Brahmanism, caste supremacism, and how he envisaged a broader unity of the like-minded forces. The fourth point. The last key point to understand is that this great scholar and leader had in fact independently worked out on this challenge of drafting a constitution when he was tasked with this responsibility by the All India Scheduled Caste Federation, of which he was a founder member. In fact, instead of merely writing about the safeguards, he also talks of danger of majoritarianism, incompatibility of Hinduism with any change, and also suggests model of economic development, which he himself describes as state socialism. He was very much aware about the dangers of majoritarianism implicit in the way Indian nationalism has developed, which according to him, quote, has developed a new doctrine which may be called the divine right of the majority to rule the minorities according to the wishes of the majority. Any claim for the sharing of power by the minority is called communalism, while the monopolizing of the whole power by the majority is called nationalism. Unquote. Of course, we do not intend to discuss this monograph in detail here, but it tells how it deepened and widened the debate further on every issue. What needed to be done to question this system of graded inequality where there is no such class as a completely unprivileged. I again quote Ambedkar, quote, a system of graded inequality in which there is no such class as a completely unprivileged class, except the one which is at the base of the social pyramid. The privileges of the rest are graded. Even the law is privileged. Every class is interested in maintaining the system, unquote. Looking at the fact that this graded hierarchy was not only sanctified, but had wider legitimacy among the broad masses of the people, it was of key importance to confront it head on. The Constitution, with the stroke of pen, resolved that there will be no discrimination on the basis of caste, gender, race, language, etc. Article 15 of the Constitution of India outlaws discrimination based on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place, or both. Treats caste at par with race as a prohibited ground of discrimination. And with the introduction of Article 17, it declared the abolition of untouchability. But such resolves were merely not enough. It was of key importance that the Constitution also decides to have commensurate laws, statutes, not only to fight discrimination, penalize all such perpetrators, but also to empower the socially oppressed people, providing them special opportunities in education and employment. No doubt, all these processes initiated empowerment of the depressed classes, although the speed was not very commendable. Propertied classes and vested interests who had enjoyed undeclared reservation and privileges for centuries together were neither comfortable with the abolition of zamindari nor affirmative action for the depressed. Petitions were filed in different courts, challenging these steps on the basis of right to equality before law. The Provisional Parliament then passed the first amendment, which supported measures to abolish zamindari and made it clear that right to equality doesn't preclude passing laws that give particular considerations to society's most vulnerable groups. One can as well mention the passage of Special Marriages Act 1954, which is a key piece of Indian legislation that allows for a civil marriage regardless of religion, religious or cultural differences. It provides a legal framework for marriage, particularly for individuals who do not wish to follow religious or cultural traditions. This act promotes inclusivity and equality by enabling individuals to many without the need for religious or caste-based restrictions. Anybody can see that how the best first amendment or this introduction of Special Marriage Act was another proof to challenge caste and other privileges, making the role of religion irrelevant when two adults decide to become life partners. As we move towards concluding this brief presentation, the not so organized review of the making of the Constitution and the initial years of the Republic of Hope, which came into existence in dealing with caste, can we say something about the last 70 years as well? Can we say that the Constitution still retains the strength to deal with such hegemonies, or there is an erosion of sorts can be witnessed? We have before us a very mixed picture. Perhaps, sorry. There will be not much disagreement over the fact that despite more than 3/4 of a journey of Indian Republic under a newly minted constitution, which declared elimination of discriminations based on caste, sex, etc., not only castes, but caste discrimination persists, and perhaps in more subtle, sophisticated forms, and has even internalized modern lexicon for its sustenance. The ascent of identity politics has further strengthened caste pride, which is amplified by the social media, and thus stopped even young people from questioning, challenging caste. Spread of electoral politics and its further deepening and normalization in society has been an additional factor which has helped strengthen this hierarchical division. Indians are still far away from eliminating discrimination based on caste. As of now, forget the envisioning of annihilation of caste by Dr. Ambedkar. Persistent and normalization of exclusions based on caste or related asymmetries have led to occasions where we witness implementation of policies or plans or even judicial intervention which further strengthen caste hierarchy and go against the spirit of the Constitution. We can look at the way reservations for the EWS, basically it was a reservation for upper caste people was granted, and when it came in the parliament, it was passed. So today we have EWS quota is there. Or there was a failed attempt via judiciary to weaken, dilute the historic 1989 Act to fight atrocities. Much needs to be done to break new grounds. Dr. Ambedkar had perhaps predicted such a situation. Professor Verma had quoted that quote, but I'm just repeating it. Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that as our people have yet to learn it. Democracy in India is only a top dressing on an Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. Perhaps more apt for our times seems to be his other quote. If the fundamental rights are opposed by the community, no law, no parliament, no judiciary can guarantee them in the real sense of the word. What is the use of fundamental rights to the Negro in America, to the Jews in Germany, and to the untouchables in India? As Borker said, there is no method found for punishing the multitude. Once again, thanks for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
The same point, which, thank you, Subhash. The point about the majoritarian, how to control the majoritarianism of the developing situation. Now, over to he's to catch a flight also, but anyway, we'll finish the meeting before your flight takes off.
Thank you, Suhas. Thanks for organizing this, and it's been always a pleasure to have this panel discussion on May Day. So, had it been aviation history, the May Day becomes a very different connotation. It's a disaster. catastrophic disaster. Well, let me begin with this whole idea of like, I'm not a constitution expert. Everybody, I mean, constitution is dear to everyone. I hope so that it is dear to every citizen of Republic of Government of India. However, I see that the citizens of the Republic of Government of India claim that they are citizens of the Republic, but they hardly claim that constitution is their own document. So there is no affinity with the constitution at all. I'll just give you one small example. One of the small vendor who is selling vegetable, or some kirana shop, or some even ready wala, let me tell you something. They say that ये constitution ठीक नहीं है. I mean, without knowing anything. ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ठीक नहीं है, इसको बदलना पड़ेगा, इसको बदलना चाहिए. दिस इज हाउ दिस, एंड दिस नैरेटिव इज नॉट समथिंग न्यू. दिस नैरेटिव आई हैव बीन हियरिंग राइट फ्रॉम माय चाइल्डहुड. I was born in 1963, and at least I know that from 1966 I have been hearing this particular claims. At least my memory is very good. I can tell you even what movies I saw during that time and how people reacted in the theater. So the question over here is that the makers of the constitution made the constitution. I consider constitution as a document of collective wisdom, but that sense of collectivity, that sense of belongingness doesn't exist at all in India. And therefore, the nomenclature of banana republic becomes a very valid nomenclature, but at the same time, why it was made to be a banana republic despite the fact that we have a very good constitution? That is a question which one has to ask, and therefore it raises two important points. One is there is something called constitutional morality and there is something called political morality. Though both deals mostly with the political class because they are the one who are framing laws, they are the one who are elected members, they are the elected representatives of the people. But at the same time, this whole idea of political morality and constitutional morality also equally applies to the every citizen of the Republic of Government of India. Your political morality is guided by your political ideologies. Let us not be let's be very clear that it is very much guided and founded by your political ideology, the political party's ideology. However, your constitutional morality need not to be guided and should not be guided by your political morality or your political ideology. It is very simple. And that is where one has to see how the whole logic of rules and principle which Dr. Ambedkar had put in annihilation of caste, how he translated that even into a constitutional legal safeguard and gave us some kind of a space for a debate, for a room for a transformation. But over a period of time, what one observes is that there is a dogmaticism, there is a paranoia, and there is a violence. It has become order of the day. It has become normative. Now, people call it that this is a new normative. I don't think it is a new normative. It was very much existing. The only difference is that now we come to know this is what has happened. Earlier, we were hardly knowing what was happening. It's very simple. During my childhood, at least I can say that we were participating in the demonstrations against the atrocities, against any kind of a thing, which were being organized by the Republican Party of India in Chandrapur. So how many people really would join? That was one question. But the second thing is that we were not knowing, only we would come to know through someone or by newspaper. I mean, newspaper would hardly carry any news. And it was all Gandhi and Congress during that time. Today, it is all about Modi and BJP. So I don't see any difference. So the politics in India is very much like a competitive foolishness. So you have fooled for so many years. So I also have a power, logic, power, and capacity to fool. And it proved to be true that yes, it fooled. So that is how it goes. Now the second point I wish to make is is that there is a constitution, there is a society, there is a development. I don't know what kind of a development we have. At least I could not judge what is development, because when I hear about, say, for example, in 2014, we heard a lot of things about smart railway, smart coach, railway coach. I don't know. Still, we have not been able to see the smart railway coach in the country. So there are a number of those smart things that have evolved in 2014 in the political vocabulary and in the public sphere. Then similarly, in the political vocabulary as well as in the public vocabulary, the word development for what, or the interrogative process of the logic of a development does not come, or the citizens does not get empowered to interrogate self. And why that interrogation of self does not happen? This is another important question which one has to ask. And then I also see very different kind of like when people talk about backwardness, and everybody try to see what are there in the constitutional provisions and how we can really ward off that backwardness. But we hardly see the actual, I mean, there are constitutional provisions, but how much there is a realization of that constitutional provisions as a part of the ground reality, as a part of the ground implementation. Because I see my country as because we are all part of the citizens, and everybody loves the country. As a citizen of the Republic of the Government of India, I find, like, how do we assess ourselves through the Constitution? What kind of achievements we have, or what kind of a developmental progress we have really made. The progress is judged most of the time by building highways, by having a good tall buildings and all those things. But do we really, like Dr. Ambedkar said, I measure the progress of the society by the status of women, how much what kind of status the women has. And I judge the progress of that society, that nation, on that basis. So one has to put this, a very fundamental thing, that how much our women have progressed and how much they have really come to this whole logic of equality. Or for that matter, let us have a survey in India and see, like, how many people really still believe that aurat pair ki juti hai. Why not to have a survey? It will be a fantastic one to talk about the status of women in the country and how Indian males, they think of the women. It is a cultural psychosis. And this cultural psychosis, basically, as Dr. Ambedkar said, that Varna is a perversion. And therefore, I say that caste is a psychotic perversion. So these psychotic perversions that are still being operational, that are being practiced in India, have produced the whole nation into a four important trajectories of the development, according to me. And what is that trajectory, or what are those achievements? That we are a fantastic labor supply country. We are a Mithyavadi Sanskriti. We are a Vitambanavadi Sanskriti. And we are a country of the Labhartis. These are the four distinct achievements we have achieved in the post-independent India. And no political class and no social class really addresses these distinct achievements. Why? Because the whole idea of the Mithyavadi Sanskriti, that is culture of mythic, and the Vitambanavadi Sanskriti, that is culture of defamation, are completely opposed to the ethos and the logic which exist in the Constitution, or for that matter, it completely opposes the very idea of nation itself. It is like you just say anything to anyone, abuse anyone, you lynch anyone, you ask that person his religion, you ask that person his caste, and you kill that person, you rape the women publicly, you lynch anyone publicly. These are all very much part of the Vitambanavadi Sanskruti, that culture of defamation. And this culture of defamation is not something that has come in post 2014. It was very much exist. It was very much there in the Indian society. That idea of hate, anger, violence is an embedded factor in the Indian society. It is structurally deeply rooted in the psyche of the Indians. And that is because of the kind of a caste structure you are living in. And that is where Dr. Ambedkar pointed out in Annihilation of Caste, that you have to annihilate it and not, you have to like people say, oh, you have to oppose caste, you have to decaste yourself. That, I mean, these are all nonsense. There is nothing called decasting. You have to annihilate the caste. And what are the mechanisms? Dr. Ambedkar proposed those mechanisms in his Annihilation of Caste, and also made his all efforts to give that kind of a strength in the constitution. However, the people who were supposed to give us a justice are full of injustices, and they constantly practice immorality, and they constantly practice hegemony, and therefore their hegemonic thinking becomes part of their cultural psychosis, which never goes out of their mind. And also their claims to rationality becomes a very dubious claim, because to me, it is very difficult to really judge rationality in India. But just very small example. When I talk about protected ignorance, so I always give this example. The professor of physics gets up in the morning, pours water to sun. Fantastic example of protected ignorance. So therefore, you cannot really judge the scientific rationality in India, despite the fact that there is a provision in the constitution that we will propagate scientific temperament. And what is that scientific temperament? The outcome of that scientific temperament, and which is an ongoing phenomena, is all tali bajao, thali bajao, corona jayega, or you use the gobar, you will come out of radiation and stuff like that. There are number of such elements which are part and parcel of the protected ignorance. Though constitutions empower us to eradicate those protected ignorance, but somehow your cultural psychosis, your belief in divine and sacred always creates an obstacle, and it also creates an obstacles to your constitutional morality. And that is the reason that we see how the judgments are written, either morni se kaisa kya karta hai, kya hota hai, or for that matter, that somebody came to the who is not even a party to that particular dispute, comes and gives testimony to in the Supreme Court, and even the court writes that it's a question of lakho logo ka asta or karodo logo ka asta. So the asta becomes your morality. Asta does not become your guiding, does not become part and parcel of rejection of those ethos which are deeply rooted in your blind faith, which is deeply rooted in your divine and sacred. And therefore, as long as the idea of divine and sacred will be there, no matter whoever comes, I think there will always be the problem of constitutional justice in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arune, as usual, very provocative. Now, can we open it to the house for a brief? I think we just have probably 10 minutes. If we can, yeah, go ahead.
We have Professor Chetan also here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I begin by the order of the speakers. Firstly, Professor Mohan, I have a question. When you specifically
Go ahead.
Okay. So when you specifically talked about, like, for example, if we do the renaming or reterming of the communities, and then because of the oligarchy, the structure would change. But then, because I deal with law and society differently, when I see that, even when you talk about the primacy of law, there is a process of socialization. There is a process of social paralysis that comes along with due to being in that community. So how should law battle with those historical injustices to battle that social paralysis? Because the reterming will not work because of that socialization. That is one thing. And when you talk, renaming of the communities. When you talk about if Namburis are made something, so it would, because of that oligarchy, the system would change. Secondly, when I was listening to you, you were talking about how the group rights were given only to the selected few. And then when I was thinking that, but that goes inconsistent with the constitution, because there is a specific portion of group rights given to linguistic and religious minorities. And when we relate it to what is happening in Uttarakhand, Mahesh Sidonia writes about it, that how Uttarakhand becomes an upper caste state using law, that Brahmin communities are becoming now tribal communities in order to prevent the application of SC/ST Atrocities Act. So I am still trying to find and how does Ambedkar introduce a mechanism where group rights are actually for the groups which are marginalized. Secondly, I mean, if Professor Achyut or Professor Vidhu could answer that, when you talk about Gramsci's concept of organic intellectuals, I was also thinking that Gramsci also talks about the concept of hegemony. So when in Constituent Assembly, there is a recent lecture by Sandipta Dasgupta where he talks about how there was no hegemony when the constitution was being made. However, we argue that there was a caste hegemony. So how would Ambedkar, coming from a social group, tries to battle through institutions and mechanisms that caste hegemony in the constitution making, not after that, but in the constitution making, because when Achyut Chetan's work is also around the Constituent Assembly. And then Professor Vidhu, when you talk about juridical categories, I mean, do you think of any other way other than that? Because when you bring in the Hannah Arendt's notion that social problems should not have a judicial or a political solution, because that leads to tyranny. What else than juridical categories could lead to a upliftment of certain social communities? That's pretty.
Else? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, sorry. Actually, it is important. I'm not asking a question. I'm just giving a comment, because in 1927, Ambedkar very presciently said, politics in India is nothing but theology in action. The manner in which religious idioms were applied, religion was excessively applied. So I, in fact, wrote an article on this in The Wire. So what is happening today in India? The manner in which the Prime Minister uses religious idioms, the ministers, the entire regime uses religious idioms. So in the context of politics being looked at from the theology, so the hegemony of the caste is further nurtured by this theology. I mean, see, for instance, Prime Minister consecrating the Ram temple, he says, Ram is Rashtra, Dev is Desh. I mean, can you imagine somebody doing that? Even Rajendra Prasad, when he went to the consecration of Somnath temple, if you look at that speech, he said, we are a secular country. So Dr. Rajendra Prasad, in Somnath temple, religious intolerance has destroyed societies, and this is a historical experience. We need to safeguard the ethos of religious tolerance. So in that context, actually, hegemony should be looked at from the way in which, I think many speakers talked about Hindu Raj. So from that perspective, we need to also look at it.
Anybody else would like to come in? No, that's okay. So we'll answer this and then we'll close. Okay. So do you want to come in first? No, come
Very quickly, I think
we'll also use this round for our concluding remarks. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
So it'll save some time.
I don't have any concluding remarks. I'll just respond to what was asked, because I think my overall, it's not concluding, but just to respond to you, I think it's a question of how do we frame what's going on in this country. And I think that's where we need greater diversity. So, for example, you're talking of theocracy, right? And whose religion is this? You talk of majoritarianism. Majority. Who is the majority here? It's a small number of people, right? So, we talk of Hindu Rashtra. So there's no time to get into that. But how do you theorize Hindu? So Narayana Guru, for example, has a different way of theorizing Hindu. He says it's like Semitic is a group name for 3 religions. Hindu is a group name for 11 Aryan Brahmin religions. It's not anyone else's religion. And they are trying to convert us into their religion. The majority of people in this country are pagans. They're outside organized religion. The biggest conversion going on in this country is from pagan to this 11 Aryan Brahminical religions. So Supreme Court has been part of that. 1964, Justice Gajendra Ghatkar wrote a decision saying, see, I've asked the question, who made me a Hindu? How did I become a Hindu? Right? So first the census said I'm a Hindu in a residual category, and then without my knowledge. And then in 1954, the Supreme Court wrote a judgment saying, recognizing only organized religions. And in 1964, Gajendra Ghatkar wrote a religion saying that Hinduism, in order to make it an organized religion, said every Hindu accepts the Vedas as a supreme authority in all matters spiritual and philosophical. This is the law today in the country. If you're a Hindu, you accept the supremacy of the Vedas, whether you like it or not. Right? So what we have, what Ambedkar, the insight Ambedkar gave us is that we have an oligarchy of a very small number, and there are many countries with oligarchies. We have not, we talk of Russian oligarchy, but we should recognize India is run by an oligarchy. Right? So then the question is, I didn't say, I was just making a hypothetical example. I was not trying to say that if you simply recategorize Nambudiri as 5, it will never happen, because Nambudiri is in charge of categorization, so it's never going to recategorize. But I was simply trying to show that ultimately this is a system, we are dealing with an oligarchy, which uses the theocracy or the idioms of religion to justify itself. Right. No, yeah. So no. Ambedkar is the one who said oligarchy, but the use of the operational use of the of words and ideas for the oligarchy to maintain itself is changing, as was recognized by various people. So I was telling you that we have to recognize this caste system as an oligarchic system, understand what its source of power is, what its expression is, and counter that. And what we have, the counter that Ambedkar gave us is representative democracy, recognizing there is no majoritarianism here, that we are all diverse people. If we all get representation, this whole oligarchy will collapse. And the law should actually fight for representative democracy of all communities in accordance with the share of population. And the census is very important to bring about this demographic transformation. Dr. Ambedkar said repeatedly in 1930, he said, we are all for responsible government and electoral democracy, but the depressed classes of this country, he repeatedly said, for them, representative democracy is most important, but that's the only way we're going to have a real democracy. So that's all I meant. And as far as group rights are concerned, the Ambedkar was not, ultimately it's only individual rights, but he's just giving a protection using the Rawlsian difference principle, that you can discriminate only in favor of the least, last and the least. So those group rights should not be misused by the powerful. So we have to counter that and build public opinion against that. But I think he gives us a way forward towards democracy and in the Constitution. One comment I want to say, what is the Constitution? How do we frame the Constitution? I consider the Constitution a site of struggle. It gives us an opportunity to continue our battle. And in that sense, the site, it has given us more tools and more instruments and more space for struggle. So to answer your question, I think it has given us more space. Those spaces are being withdrawn. We have to fight to keep those spaces. But the Constitution is only a site of struggle, the Indian Constitution.
Baloni? Just a short telegraphic.
It also reminds me of one of the Constituent Assembly debate where Dr. Ambedkar had suggested that franchise should be made as a fundamental right, and it did not happen. Franchise should be made as a fundamental right.
I didn't understand what
Franchise.
Franchise, yeah. So it was, the Sardar Patel did not take up during that time. That's a different story. But the kind of casualties that has happened because of not having franchisee as a fundamental right, I think our sufferings are enormously growing all the time. Of course, we cannot imagine that, but nevertheless, there are provisions. There are, like, as Dr. Ambedkar had said, we are having a conversation with Mulk Rajan, that I was all alone, but there is the next generation. There are many things for the next generation to take it up through the directive principles, and we hope that that next generation has emerged after a very, very long time in India, and I hope that generation grows now and also numerically increases so that we will have transformation in the country.
Chetan,
Yeah. So I was expecting a question about this, what I presented, but this is a different question altogether. I hope you can hear me. That is, I believe, a big problem, because the terms of the debates are usually set in places which are very far off from where the people of India really live. Anyway, going back to the question, just one answer, and this is also to provoke you into thinking, because you talked about the idea of hegemony and casteist hegemony, particularly during the making of the constitution. I think one of the most brilliant stroke of luck that India had was when Dr. Ambedkar was chosen as the chairperson of the drafting committee. If you think of the idea of hegemony, it works through consent. And the consent is usually extracted or taken from the subordinate class or the subaltern class or the subordinate caste. What happens in the Constituent Assembly is actually the reverse. It is Dr. Ambedkar who proposes, and he seeks the consent of the what you call the casteist hegemonic group in the Constituent Assembly. And you can see the debates throughout, from the first draft that he presented in February 1948 to the second draft that he presents again in November 1948. You can see each time he brings up something, it is Dr. Ambedkar who is proposing something, and most of his proposals are very emancipatory in nature. And the other casteist, so-called upper caste groups in the Constituent Assembly had to either agree with him or disagree with him. And he had then to say, if you are disagreeing with me, you have to give me sound reason. So I think there was a kind of, personally, I feel that the Constituent Assembly debates have to be read as a site of rationalization, a site of ratiocination, in which the idea of getting consent or the task or the onus of giving consent was not on the subordinate groups, but on the casteist hierarchies. And if you read the Hindu Code Bills debate parallel to the Constituent Assembly debates, I think this was the...
Well, I'll quickly, because his response is different, I'll try to just quickly say that yes, hegemony is used from Gramsci, and it usually applies, it means some kind of consent and coercion involved. And here, I mean, I would disagree. I think in the Constituent Assembly debates, if you go through them, you know, a lot is happening behind the scenes. And that is why when after the partition, the reservations for religious minorities was withdrawn, you know, we know that it had a lot to do with what was happening in civil society, what was happening in you know, the problem with Muslim League and so on. So I think that Constituent Assembly debates are very important, and we do read them, but we must also realize that Ambedkar must be negotiating a lot with the others to reach that point where he could actually argue his case. And everybody knew that this was being recorded and written down and so on. So they had to be very careful with what they're saying. Secondly, I don't entirely agree that Ambedkar had such a free hand, especially when Krishna Iyer, you know, towards the end said that the scheduled caste will be a part of the Hindu community. We know that this was not the way the deliberations began. It is only towards the end when the deal had to be struck, you know, that scheduled caste and scheduled tribes will get reservations, that scheduled castes will be a part of the Hindu. which was not what Ambedkar started off. Thank you.
Will you give me just 30 seconds to respond to these two comments, just to make this thought that actually I agree with you, and that the process in the Constituent Assembly was far more complex than appears in the debates, because there were committees and all that. But the problem I've encountered is that the Constituent Assembly was relatively speaking more representative than the state, Indian state. So you took a constitution prepared by a relatively more representative body with much more consensus and discussion, and you gave it to be worked by an executive and a judiciary and a legislature that was far less representative, far more dominated by the oligarchy, and far less democratic. And so that there is that gap. So I think the problem is not that the Constituent Assembly was not representative enough. The problem is the Indian state that works the Constitution is almost totally oligarchic and unrepresentative.
So thank you very much. It's been a long session, and thank you for these patience. I just want to end that the caste hegemony is very much with us today, and we need, as Ambedkar would say, a comprehensive approach to dismantling the system, and a fundamental shift in how society is organized. So that's very critical, because we can't keep pushing things under the carpet. I mean, the recognition first is the diagnosis, and we are casteist. There's no doubt about it. And until we recognize it on the face, things won't change. Thank you very much. Thank you.